My parents wanted me to make my wedding smaller so that they could help pay for my sister's honeymoon. My sister had just had the biggest, most expensive wedding ever. It cost $150,000, and my parents paid for every single penny. That's a huge amount of money, way more than most people spend on weddings. My Octavia, who is 32, and I, who am 27, had been planning our wedding very carefully. We didn't want anything super fancy or over the top. We just wanted a nice wedding that felt right for us. We were making sure to stay within a budget, so we didn't spend too much money. At first, my parents seemed okay with what we were doing. They didn't complain, and they didn't try to tell us what to do. But little by little, they started making small comments that made me feel unsure. My mom would say things like, "People waste so much money on weddings. They should be saving money for important things like a house or the future." My dad would talk about how the economy was not good and how smart people always know when to save money and when to spend less. I thought maybe they were just old-fashioned and that this was how they saw weddings. I thought, okay, they just have a different way of thinking. But we weren't being reckless or careless. We were making sure everything we did made sense and fit our budget. And I thought really they should understand that. After all, my sister had just had the biggest, most amazing wedding, and my parents paid for all of it. No one told my sister to spend less or to plan something smaller. Even so, I tried to give my parents the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were only worried about my future. Maybe they thought that after spending so much on my sister's wedding, they didn't have enough money to help me. I would have understood that. I really would have. So I decided to ask them directly if that was the reason. I thought it was better to be honest and ask rather than just guessing. But instead of giving me a clear answer, they told me how proud they were that I was being careful with money. They said that making financial sacrifices showed maturity and wisdom. My mom even said I was different from my sister because I was practical, while my sister was always more emotional. That should have been my first warning, but I didn't realize it yet. The moment I really understood what was happening came when I accidentally overheard a conversation. One afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house. The door was open, so I walked in. My mom was making tea in the kitchen, and my dad was sitting in the living room watching TV. Then my sister called them on the phone. My parents put her on speakerphone, so her voice filled the whole room. She sounded so happy and excited. She said she had been stressed about her honeymoon, but now everything was going to be okay because Mom and Dad promised to help pay for it. She said she really wanted a luxury resort, and she was so thankful that they would give her money for it. My parents told her not to worry, that they understood how important it was for her to have the perfect honeymoon after such a big wedding. And that's when I realized everything. My parents weren't being careful with money because they cared about my wedding or about saving money for my future. No, they just wanted me to make my wedding smaller, so that they could use the money for my sister's fancy honeymoon. My sister had already had her dream wedding, and now she was getting extra money for a luxury vacation. I had to stop myself from yelling or crying. I felt so angry and upset, but I stayed calm. I waited until my mom hung up the phone. I acted normal. I drank my tea, made small talk, and left. I felt a little silly for ever thinking my parents had my best interest at heart. But I wasn't going to argue or cry. If they wanted me to make sacrifices, I would, but I wasn't going to do it the way they wanted. The next morning, my anger had turned into a plan. I called my Octavia and told him everything that had happened. He wasn't surprised. He had always noticed that my parents favored my sister. I asked him what he thought we should do, and I told him, "I have a plan." That same afternoon, we met with our wedding planner. She was amazing. She was efficient, friendly, and ready to help us make changes to our wedding plan. I explained to her what had happened with my parents. Since they were so worried about costs, we were going to follow their advice, but in our own way. The first thing we did was trim the guest list. Anyone my parents had insisted on inviting was gone. That meant distant relatives we barely knew, old family friends we hadn't seen in years, and business contacts who didn't even know us personally. We kept only the people we actually cared about and wanted to celebrate with. That alone saved a huge amount of money. Then we looked at the things my parents had chosen for the wedding. The fancy venue they loved? Gone. We went back to our original pick, which was cozy, intimate, and half the price. The expensive catering my dad wanted because he had connections? Replaced with a cheaper option that actually had better food. The live band my mom begged for? Gone. We got a DJ instead. And the full bar my dad said was essential? No way. We decided to have just beer, wine, and one special cocktail. Every single decision we made was fair, practical, and completely reasonable. But I knew my parents would hate it. They wanted me to make sacrifices, but they weren't going to decide how I did it. And the best part? Since they were always telling us to be financially responsible, we didn't ask them for any money. We could pay for everything ourselves. From then on, I kept them updated with a short, polite email. I didn't want to fight or have arguments. I just sent a thank you for their advice and a summary of the new plan. I told them about the guest changes, the venue, the catering, the entertainment, and the new lower budget. Everything was being paid for by my Octavia and me, because really they weren't helping us at all. They only had opinions. I had asked them for help a few times, not because I felt entitled, but because they were the ones pushing for fancy things. But apparently they had better things to spend money on, like my sister's honeymoon. Every time I mentioned money, my mom would sigh and say, "Weddings shouldn't cost so much." My dad would lecture about how young people today don't know financial responsibility. And both would always end with the same conclusion: just cut back. But here's the problem. They didn't want to cut anything for themselves. I was supposed to cut my guest list, but theirs stayed the same. I was supposed to get a cheaper dress, but my mom still wanted her custom gown. I was supposed to drop the DJ, but my dad needed the full bar for his friends. It didn't make any sense at all. They acted like I was some clueless kid. But when I followed their advice and actually cut costs, suddenly I was the one who was ruining everything. It would be funny if it weren't so ridiculous. So now my Octavia and I are taking full control. We are paying for everything ourselves, but only for what we want. If my parents want to throw their own party, they can do that. I'm just sitting back and waiting for them to get upset. Here's something important. My parents never actually offered to pay for my wedding. The only thing they ever did was give us a long list of demands. Things they wanted included in the wedding. Even though I told them those things didn't fit our budget, I was still expected to pay for all of them. I even offered to let them pay for the things they specifically wanted, and they still said no. Then they started talking about being financially responsible. But now I understand what that really meant. I pay for everything we want, and I have to cut everything I don't care about. That's why they had no problem spending $150,000 on my sister's wedding and then even more money on her honeymoon. When I finally sent them the message about our new wedding plan, they didn't take long to show how they really felt. Less than an hour later, my mom called me. She was not happy. She said she was shocked by my choices and didn't expect me to go this far. She didn't name the things she was upset about, but I knew exactly what she meant, her ideas. I reminded her that I had followed her and my dad's advice. I had cut expenses, stayed within budget, and made the wedding simpler and more financially responsible. That was what they had been telling me all along. She tried to backpedal. She said she never meant for me to go this far, and that I should have talked to them first before deciding what to cut. I told her I had talked to them many times, and every time they told me to reduce costs, that's what I did. I could hear her irritation growing when she said, "Now it just seems so small. Didn't you want to celebrate it properly?" I asked her why she was more upset about the downsizing than I was. I mean, I am the bride. This is my wedding. If I'm okay with it, why wasn't she? There was a long pause. Then she finally said, "It's just not what I imagined for you." And there it was. It was never about me. It had never been about me. It was about her dreams. I asked her whose vision we were really following here. If she had all these big dreams for a wedding, maybe she should have planned a second wedding for herself instead of trying to live through mine. That's when the polite conversation ended. She started calling me ungrateful and said I was the worst for doing all of this. I told her I had just done what she and my dad wanted: cut costs, save money, be responsible. Then I hit her with the final truth. Funny how you and Dad only care about saving money when it's my wedding. But when it was your golden daughter's wedding, money was no object. Boom. That was it. She exploded. She started ranting about how I was twisting everything, how my sister's wedding was different, how my parents were in a better financial place at that time, and how much they had sacrificed for her too. I reminded her that my sister had gotten married just a few months ago, so I couldn't understand how their money situation could have changed so much. If they really didn't have enough money now, why were they still ready to pay for her super fancy honeymoon? They had no problem spending tons of money on her, but suddenly they wanted me to be careful with my wedding. I told her that they could spend money however they wanted on my wedding, but it was my wedding and my money, and I wasn't going to waste it on things I didn't want or need. She didn't answer me. Instead, she said I was only thinking about money, and that family should be more important than that. I heard that line before, and I didn't like it. I told her that in our family, family comes first only seemed to matter when it helped them, not me. Then I said I had nothing more to say and hung up the phone. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. Not long after, my sister called me. I hesitated, thinking about whether I should answer. I knew if I didn't pick up, she would just keep calling until I did. I took a deep breath and decided to answer. She started off very nice, using her sweetest voice. She said congratulations to me for finally making the smart choice about my wedding. She told me she always thought my original wedding plans were too much, and she was so happy that I had come to my senses. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She was trying to trick me into agreeing with her and making me feel like I was wrong. I didn't want to fall for it, so I kept my answer short and polite. I just said, and thanks for calling. Then she started teasing me. She said how wonderful it was that I was being careful with spending money, and how it was a big relief to Mom and Dad that they didn't have to worry about my wedding costs anymore. So I asked her, were those other priorities for her honeymoon? There was silence. Then she got a little defensive. What does that mean? She asked. I told her I had overheard a phone call, and I knew the truth. I knew our parents were happily paying for her no-expense-spared honeymoon while telling me to be careful and spend less on my wedding. She immediately tried to cover it up. She said I had misunderstood and that our parents were just trying to help me make smarter choices. I told her I didn't need her to defend them. The facts were clear. And just like that, she flipped. She went from being sweet to being very angry. She said I was selfish, that I was trying to punish our parents because they didn't spoil me the way they spoiled her, and that I was just throwing a tantrum because I wasn't the favorite child. I laughed. I told her I wasn't punishing anyone. I was doing exactly what they had asked me to do. Cut unnecessary things and be financially responsible. If that meant taking out things they wanted but wouldn't pay for, that was their problem, not mine. Then I asked her, are you scared now? Scared that I know the truth? Maybe our parents will start being financially responsible with you, too. She didn't say anything. I hung up the phone and stared at it for a long time, waiting for another call. It never came. Honestly, I think the best wedding gift I ever got was leaving them speechless. Two things were calm for a day. Too calm. I knew my family well enough to know that silence doesn't mean they gave up. It just means they're thinking, planning, and trying to figure out how to turn the situation in their favor. And right on cue, my dad called. Unlike my mom and sister, my dad never yells or tries to make you feel guilty. He is always calm and acts like the adult in the room. I picked up the phone, ready for whatever he was going to say. He started talking slowly and in a measured voice, saying that he wanted to have a calm and civilized conversation. He said my mom was very upset and that they were both shocked by my reaction. I reminded him that I had done exactly what they asked me to do. They should have been proud, even happy, that I finally listened. He said, of course we wanted you to be responsible, but that doesn't mean we wanted you to plan a cheap, embarrassing wedding. I asked him why my wedding suddenly became embarrassing when they were the ones telling me not to spend too much. He ignored my question. Instead, he said I had misunderstood their guidance. They never meant for me to cut everything. I asked him what exactly I had cut. That was so unacceptable. The venue was still beautiful. Sure, it was smaller, but it was still elegant. I only removed distant friends and social connections from the guest list. If they weren't paying, why should I invite them? The food was still great, just not the super expensive caterer my mom insisted on. And as for music, my Octavia and I prefer to DJ anyway. So, I asked again, what was the real problem? There was a long pause. Then he said it wasn't about anything specific. It was about principle. I had heard that before. They always talk about principle when they don't have a real reason, but still want to make me feel wrong. I told him I finally understood. The problem wasn't that I cut costs. The problem was that I removed their control. That's what they didn't like. They didn't care about saving money when it came to their guest list or their vision for the wedding, none of which they were paying for. Money only became an issue when I dared to say no. He said I was making a mistake and would regret excluding my family from such an important event. I told him my family was still invited. They were welcome to come and celebrate with us, but they could not control my wedding. There was silence again. Then he asked if I was really going through with this. I said yes. That was that. Or so I thought. I knew my parents would eventually find out what had happened. I had no doubt my sister would run to them, crying and saying I had spoken horribly to her and that I uninvited the whole family. But surprisingly, it didn't happen right away. It took a few days. Finally, my mom started calling me nonstop. When I didn't answer, my dad started calling too. When I ignored both of them, they switched to texting. They didn't ask why I uninvited them. They went straight to guilt. How could you do this to us? We're your parents. We gave you everything. This is disgusting. You're throwing your family away for nothing. Just the usual guilt trips. I let the messages pile up for a while. It was just one rant after another. When I felt ready, I finally called them back. The first thing I asked was whether they really thought I would combine my wedding with my sister's honeymoon and her ridiculous husband. They actually sounded offended. They said they couldn't give her a fancy honeymoon if I was having such a modest wedding. I laughed loudly. I said I had never heard anything more ridiculous in my life. My dad, clearly annoyed, tried to go back to his calm, rational way of talking. He didn't raise his voice or yell. He just tried to explain things slowly like he always does. But I had already made up my mind. My wedding was going to be my wedding. I would spend my money how I wanted and not let anyone control it. It was a long, tiring few days. But I felt proud. For the first time, I felt like I had stood up for myself and my Octavia. I wasn't going to let anyone manipulate me, not my sister, not my mom, and not even my dad. I was careful with my money, I made smart choices, and I still made the wedding beautiful. It was my special day, and no one could take that away from me. He told me I was overreacting. I said, maybe I am. But then I thought about it, and I knew it wasn't really me who was overreacting. They were the ones overreacting. They were acting like it was all about how they looked. And honestly, if they really thought they looked bad, it was because of the way they were behaving. They were acting like the worst kind of parents a bride could ever imagine. But he kept insisting that I didn't understand anything. So I asked him, okay, what exactly am I misunderstanding? I wanted him to explain it clearly. Was it that my parents had pushed me to make my wedding smaller? Was it that, right after that, they planned a fancy, expensive vacation, a honeymoon, for my sister and her husband? Or was it that they tried to hide it by calling it a family trip, so no one would know the truth? I wanted to know what he thought I was misunderstanding. The next phone call I made was to my brother-in-law. As soon as he picked up the phone, I started yelling at him. I didn't even let him say a word. I asked him if he had lost his mind. Did he really think he could get a free honeymoon by combining it with my wedding? I told him that he should pay for his own trip. I reminded him that they had already saved plenty of money from my wedding, so there was no reason to trick everyone into giving them a free vacation. I spoke very clearly and didn't hold back. I had always thought that my brother-in-law could be a little cowardly sometimes, but I didn't think he was weak enough to let my parents plan his honeymoon for him. I wanted him to feel embarrassed, so I asked him if he was so poor that he couldn't take his wife on a proper trip without taking money from other people. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I called his mother. I had only spoken to her a couple of times before, but I already knew the kind of person she was. She cared a lot about what other people thought. She liked to be seen as respectable and perfect. I made sure she knew exactly what her son was trying to do. I asked her if she knew that her perfect son and his perfect wife were trying to hijack my wedding just to get a free honeymoon. I asked her how it felt to know that her son could do something so shameless. I made sure to act completely shocked and disgusted, like I couldn't believe that a man she had raised could do something so low. And just like I expected, she was speechless. She didn't know what to say. She kept repeating, "That can't be true. That doesn't make sense. I need to talk to him about this." I said, "Oh, please do." And then, just to make the point even stronger, I added a casual comment about how disappointed I was that someone she raised would try to take advantage of a family like that. She was horrified. And then, that's when the real fireworks started. She immediately called my mom. I wasn't there for that call, but I didn't need to be. I already knew what had happened because an hour later, my dad sent me a frantic message. He said that I had gone too far, and that my mom was furious. She had sent me a long, angry rant in a text. She said that I had humiliated her in front of my sister-in-law's mother, and that she had never been so embarrassed in her life. She said I was vindictive, bitter, and completely out of control. I just smiled at my phone because that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted her to feel embarrassed. And the best part was, I still had one more move left. Not only had I uninvited them from the wedding, but I also sent out a new set of invitations. These new invitations made it very clear who was not welcome at my wedding. By the time they found out, it would be too late. I would have the last laugh while they sat there in shame, knowing they couldn't come. Now it's time for one final update, because the wedding has already happened, and so has our honeymoon. There is no more drama with my parents. They are officially cut off from my life, and I am cut off from theirs. Some of my earlier posts might not have been very clear because I wrote them while I was still very angry. So here's a simple and clear summary. My parents regretted agreeing to pay for my sister's luxury honeymoon. They realized it would look bad if people compared her wedding and honeymoon to mine, especially since everyone knew that they had paid for hers. That alone wasn't a huge problem. In our town, it's normal for the bride's parents to pay for the wedding. But in their minds, people would look at my wedding and say, wow, they really have a favorite child, and think they were terrible parents. So they tried to find a compromise, a way to fix things and still seem fair. I didn't accept that compromise. Instead, I made everything explode. After the first invitations went out, my parents found out because someone showed them. That's when the texts started coming in. They said things like, not only are we not invited, now you're trying to humiliate us. I expected a flood of angry messages, but I only got a few. Why? Because they were too busy dealing with their own flood of messages from other people. I had put the reason they weren't invited right on the invitation. I don't usually do that, but I didn't want nosy people asking me why my parents weren't there. And it worked. The result was simple. First, they didn't come to the wedding, which made it 10 times better for me. Second, they didn't pay for my sister's honeymoon. That wasn't my main goal, but it happened anyway. And the cherry on top? My call to my sister's mother-in-law caused big trouble in her family. Her husband didn't defend her when his mom yelled at him and my sister over the phone. And since he didn't defend her, my sister asked for a divorce just like that. At the very least, my parents should have thanked me. I saved them money for the honeymoon. I made them financially responsible for it, even if they were too mad to admit it. They say they've cut me off from the family, which is fine because I have done the same. My only regret is that I didn't convince them to actually pay for the honeymoon. If they had paid for both the wedding and the honeymoon for a marriage that lasted less than a year, it would have been so funny. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on a marriage that barely lasted past the honeymoon. So much for being rational, right, Dad? And even their rational thinking didn't help them in the end. Because of the invitations and because everyone in our town loves gossip, now everyone knows exactly what happened. None of this would have happened if my mom had just paid for the shrimp and lobster she insisted on having at my wedding. But now I know the truth. They couldn't pay because the wedding had already drained all their money, and the honeymoon would have been too expensive. Some responsibility, huh? At least I have been a better daughter than they will ever admit. I saved them money. Now it's time to say goodbye. And thank you to everyone who followed this wild story of my wedding. Oh, and I need to correct something I said earlier. Apparently, my parents did pay for the honeymoon, but only one person went. That person was my sister. I didn't know this because at that time, she was only posting sad quotes and moody stories on social media while on the honeymoon. She was sad about her marriage, which explains why I hadn't noticed. So yes, correction noted,